お待ちしておりましたわ。では、本日も参りましょうか。
This is Way of the Samurai 4, one of my personal favourites. But first, a word of warning. The PC port of Way of the Samurai 4 is god-awful. Loading up the Steam version on Windows 10, this game will do everything in its power to stop you from playing it. Attempt to start the game, crash. Go into the options menu after booting up the game, crash. Options menu finally works and you can change the resolution, crash. First 30 seconds of the game, crash. Final 30 seconds of the— yeah, you get it. Mid-game crashes are always annoying, but it's the loading crashes that will deter most players, because before you find the solution, you would just assume that the game doesn't work at all. I went looking for fixes for the loading crashes online, but it turns out that the real fix is patience. When the game is loading, don't mess with it. Don't click anything, don't Alt-Tab, don't even look at your phone. After a little while, it just works. Then after that, all you have to worry about is the quest bugs and the atrocious sound glitches. Way of the Samurai 4 is a game that can be played several times over, and each time you play it, you learn something new about the factions, the characters, and the gameplay mechanics. The closest Western equivalent might be something like Alpha Protocol. They are both short games where your decisions greatly impact the gameplay and story at large, and need to be played multiple times to really appreciate. Way of the Samurai 4 is the game where you can side with the racist weirdos who live in a cave, the default enemies in most people's first playthrough, and actually begin to sympathise with some of their motives. It's a game where some parts of it seem lazily built or inaccessible, until you realise that the path you take in the story can drastically change the world around you. The first time you enter Little Britain, you'll quickly realise that none of the generic NPCs can be communicated with, but if you follow the story path that opens up the language school, you'll find that the next time you start a new game, the school will still be open, and now you can talk to foreigners. Alternatively, you can even unlock a foreign face for your next character who can speak English by default. Find the Gaijin, learn the ways of the Gaijin, become the Gaijin. It's set in a fictional Japanese port town during the 1850s, in the waning years of the shogunate. This was a period of time when US Commodore Matthew Perry showed up with an armada and bullied Japan into trading with the rest of the world. Well, that's the setting of Way of the Samurai 4, except instead of the US, it's the British Empire for some reason. The arrival of the black ships fast-tracked Japan into the modern world, and the samurai, who had already endured a sharp decline during the peaceful Edo period, completely faded away or became masterless ronin. You play as one of these aimless ronin, arriving in the fictional portside town of Amihama to eke out a living, by any means necessary. The gameplay is what's most likely to turn people away. At the beginning of the game, combat feels horrendous. The health and stamina system probably won't make sense at first. Your moveset is extremely limited, your weapons break easily, and if you choose normal difficulty, you chose wrong. Starting on normal difficulty for the first time will probably turn you off the game forever. This game isn't designed to be played on normal difficulty for your first or even second playthrough. It's a guaranteed way to make people hate the game, because the entirety of the experience revolves around learning the game mechanics and building up your inventory over the course of multiple runs. The difficulty level scales up the health of enemies, along with the quality of the equipment you can find, and also unlocks rewards for your future runs. Playing the game at a higher difficulty without the necessary upgraded equipment not only makes the combat a lot more tedious, but it can also force you into some unwinnable situations. As a samurai, you fight with katana, spear, and eventually, gun. The xenophobes are destroying the coastal town of Amihama, now they're learning to fear the Glock. The combat system is a lot deeper than you'll first realise, but also incredibly flawed once you understand it. You fight by using light and heavy attacks, while being able to block and dodge. Starting off, you can't really do much, and the fighting feels really clunky and unintuitive. That's because you unlock combos and special moves the more you fight. Special moves such as whacking them across the room like a baseball, or summoning a hail of bullets no matter where you are. There are dozens of fighting styles to collect and learn, each of them with different movesets and abilities. The more you invest into a particular style, the more combos you can pull off, the more special attacks you can use, and the better the combat feels. The fatal flaw of this system is that mastery of a style takes a lot of dedication, usually around 2 or more full playthroughs, and once you decide to change to a different style, you have to start from the beginning again. On top of the styles, you can also fight in different stances, with your blade reversed to do non-lethal damage, with your bare hands, and eventually you can go full weeb and dual-wield katanas. There is far too much content, and much like the noble Japanese salaryman, you'll only be able to master just one thing in your life before dying alone in an uncaring world. During combat, everybody has a life bar and a stamina bar. When not under attack, the stamina bar replenishes the life bar, so combat revolves around either depleting your opponent's life bar as quickly as possible before they have time to heal, or by beating them senseless with the blunt edge of your blade to take away their ability to heal. There are also a lot of situations in which beating an enemy with the blunt edge can completely subdue them and force them to flee or surrender. The combat takes a bit of getting used to, and can be extremely frustrating when you spend ages whittling down their health and stamina, only to catch them munching down a rice bowl and healing to full health straight away. The story is insane, and often bounces between a dead serious tone to some of the goofiest material I've ever heard. Most of the characters are equally insane, but all in their own ways. They are usually built upon a single, uncompromising personality trait, such as unwavering loyalty, hopeless naivety, or unbridled racism. They are divided into three main factions. The Disciples of Prajna, led by the suicidally brave Redo Akagi, they aim to return Japan to its former isolationist state by any means necessary, and I do mean any means necessary. Then there's the members of the Magistrate, the Shogunate's law enforcement, who have several conflicting ideologies within their ranks, and then there are the British ambassadors. I don't speak Japanese, and never will, so I can only assume that the Japanese characters have normal Japanese names. But what about the British character names? Well, we have Jet Jenkins, Laura Lita, and my personal favourite, Melinda Megamelons. Make sure you abide by British naming conventions when making a foreigner as your character. None of these factions represent a united front, and every new playthrough will reveal the flaws in each of them, all except for the Chief Minister, intelligent, nihilistic, and with a wicked sense of humour. There are no flaws in his ideology because he is unapologetically evil and does not want nor need to be understood by you.
Samurai はあっけなく死んだ。弔う者は誰一人いなかった。
Side against him, and you'll see that he is a madman. Or side with him, and you'll also see that he's a madman. One of his goals is to rule the world by turning everybody into S&M fanatics, and to keep them as his thralls.
しまってください。
The game has 10 distinct endings, and it's not just as simple as choosing a faction and sticking with them until the end. Some endings can only be achieved with a well-equipped and well-endowed character. Some endings can be achieved accidentally, while some require several precise playthroughs in order to set up the game world in a perfect way to achieve. That's one of the biggest strengths, in my opinion, and is unique among other story-based RPGs. There are seldom few RPGs where your skill, equipment, or previous playthroughs of the game actually affect the story. For most RPGs, the story is dictated purely by dialogue choices or other decisions clearly outlined by the game. One ending had my samurai running off for revenge because I neglected to protect the Lolita girl during an assassination attempt. I just assumed she would be invulnerable while I fought off the attackers. I was wrong. And I love that stuff. Not every game needs to make its choices obvious, and not every RPG needs to remove player skill from the equation when dictating the outcome of the story. Like many Japanese-made games, it has a sense of humour that skirts the line between juvenile and quirky, and creepy and unsettling. I don't know what's going on with this actual child, but I'm pretty sure she's your samurai's canonical love interest. It's quite clear that the localization team who translated the game from Japanese to English was allowed to do whatever the hell they wanted. There are seldom few moments in the game where your samurai's dialogue options actually reflect the seriousness of the situation at hand. I don't know what the original Japanese release was like, and never will, so I'm not sure if the translation is in any way accurate, but your character is able to somehow represent every notch on the spectrum by constantly interrupting people with inane questions, making inappropriate remarks during formal dinners, and being completely non-verbal when the situation absolutely calls for a response. It's beautiful.
表を上げなさい。いい目をしていますね。冷酷な。表を上げなさい。
Despite the fact that some playthroughs can be completed in under 2 hours, it's not short of content. The content is not particularly varied, but there are several basic side missions and activities to do just by talking to NPCs. You can also go fishing, do the gambling minigame that I will never ever attempt to understand, and there's a persistent dojo that the samurai can manage across multiple playthroughs. At the dojo you can store equipment, and all your leftover money from your previous run will be waiting for you here. If you find and beat up certain NPCs in the street, you can recruit them to your dojo like Pokemon. Challenges will also appear from time to time and start murdering your pupils until you put them in the ground. It's actually pretty annoying after a while, and I reached the point where I would only take over the dojo when I felt my playthrough was coming to an end, so that I wouldn't have to keep returning to babysit my pupils. But if you follow the sensei questline, you can have her deal with any challengers who show up. Oh, and you can nightcrawl. Every female NPC in the game is romanceable, yes, even the child. But not these children, despite my best efforts. You can start with some pickup lines and try to get invited back to their place. There's even a stealth minigame to get into their pants that involves giving their husbands and fathers permanent brain damage. Romancing certain named NPCs is such an involved process that you'll usually need a completely dedicated playthrough to do it. I had to let this woman torture me 3 times in a row before she would even look at me. Then she straight up murdered me, twice. All because the QuickTime button prompt to defend myself wasn't showing up. Then I had to do it 6 more times. Was it all worth it? God, yes. Way of the Samurai 4. It's weird, poorly made, frustrating, but above all, unique. It's an experience that few games can come close to. It's a game that cannot be judged on first impressions alone. A game where every single character can die depending on the choices you make. Where allies from the previous game can be enemies in your next. A game in which the world remembers you in your next playthrough, and a game that you won't soon forget. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I really appreciate it. See you next time.
観念しろい。
私がお相手いたしましょう。